The riots now were the first big test for Sir Keir Starmer as the new Prime Minister. And the Times reports this morning on how he drew on his experience as the director of the Crown Prosecution Service during the 2011 riots. Well, let's speak to Times Radio's political correspondent Theo Usherwood. And I wonder, Theo, I mean, there's so much about Keir Starmer's experience of the Crown Prosecution Service. He knows the system back to front. And many are saying that this has certainly schooled him because he's been through the riots in 2011, many similar issues, but also how, as Prime Minister, you have this, in many ways awesome power, but you need to know kind of how to use that. And Keir Starmer certainly does by the look of things.
Yes, good morning, Peter. Good morning, Chloe. I think there are two parts to this in this Saturday read in the Times, and I'd recommend it whether you buy the paper or get the app. But firstly is this idea that he had to create at very short notice mobile police units, which could be strategically placed up and down the country to respond very, very quickly to outbreaks of violence. One of the big problems that police forces were facing during these riots were knowing exactly where they were going to happen, that they might have intelligence that a riot would take place and then suddenly it didn't happen, and then they wouldn't have any intelligence that a riot would take place and suddenly it did happen. Oliver Wright in the Times details how the national capability, this so-called standing army that Keir Starmer referred to, had been hollowed out from his time when he was, of course, the Director of Public Prosecutions. It simply didn't exist now, and it needed to be created at very, very short notice in order to respond effectively to the riots and ensure that the police weren't outnumbered. The second part is Keir Starmer remaining steadfast in his belief that the Crown Prosecution Service needed to act, and it needed to act quickly. And we've heard reports earlier in the week that the CPS needed a rocket under it in order to ensure that those arrested and charged by the police didn't suddenly go out in bail or weren't remanded into custody, but went before the courts in a matter of days, if not hours, and were sentenced to significant jail terms, because Keir Starmer was of the belief from 2011 that if you had other people back at home looking at their televisions, looking at their going online and seeing people jailed for 2, 3, 4 years in some cases, then they would then that would really affect their decision making about whether they wanted to go out and take part in further protests, and that was something that Keir Starmer was very keen to see. So, yeah, there's been a lot of conversation, of course, about the part that the public played on Wednesday, but I think what's detailed in the Times today is the lengths the government and particularly Keir Starmer went to in those Cobra meetings to ensure that the riots stopped.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because the Times front page story is talking about the King, and he has sort of finally said something about this and certainly spoken to many of the key players, both from the police and politically, talking to the Prime Minister as well. We know the King behind the scenes has been asking for updates every single day, but what is the significance, do you think, politically, of the fact that he has now made it public that he has had these conversations and hinting towards a potential visit maybe to Southport or maybe other areas that have been affected by the riots as well?
It is significant, Peter. I think there's there has been some sort of quiet criticism, if I can call it that, that perhaps the palace didn't intervene sooner, that the King didn't come out with a message sooner in order to try and bring the country together at a time of deep division. But you can also see, in fairness to the palace and in fairness to the King, why it would be necessary actually just to allow the government a bit of space in order to get these riots under control, and that when they were under control, like they are, or at least appear to be now, and of course we've got the weekend ahead of us, that it now is the time to come out and say, it's time for unity to bring the country together. And for the King, this is the first time in his tenure as the leader of the nation, as the monarch, when we've had such disorder in British society. Of course, his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, was very considered in the way that she dealt with intervened in the 2011 riots. So this is a difficult balance to strike, but I think it will be a welcome one from all quarters politically that the King has chosen this particular time to make his feelings felt.
Yes, Theo, and it's interesting as well, away from the thoughts on the handling of the riots, really, there's quite a lot around today about Rachel Reeves as well, the Chancellor, because she's in a tight spot. Of course, she spent a lot of money on the policing with the riots, but of course she is talking perhaps about a fuel duty hike in the budget, because there's been a 13-year freeze on fuel duty. Is she finally going to have to put it up and risk the wrath of the motorist?
Right. Well, it's interesting. This one I think is particularly interesting. So there's two parts to the fuel duty that Rachel Reeves could reverse or cut. So there's a 5p cut, 5p per litre cut that Rishi Sunak introduced in 2022 that is due to go ahead, and Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, could reverse that. So that in fact there's no cut to fuel duty. The second part to it, as you rightly point out, is the fuel duty freeze that the Tories kept for 13 years, which sees fuel duty go up in line with inflation. Inflation now is down, of course, to around target 2 to 3%. So it wouldn't, it wouldn't increase significantly were Rachel Reeves to drop it. But I think politically, this one, fuel duty versus, say, capital gains tax, is potentially breaking her promise and Keir Starmer's promise during the general election not to put up taxes on working people. Working people drive. They drive to school to take the kids. They go to the office. They do jobs like plumbers and electricians and builders. They are working people. And if Rachel Reeves goes ahead with either of the two decisions that I've talked about, it would be a tax on working people. She would be accused of putting up a tax on working people.
Well, there's also an interesting story in the Telegraph today about employers may be forced to boost pension contributions to ease the retirement crisis. I know Rachel Reeves will be thinking all of that in terms of thinking about the budget, but the story I think we absolutely must talk about, at least for a wee minute, is about the urinal in the Chancellor's office, Theo, because there's a controversy about whether to cover it up.
Yes, so Rachel Reeves revealed this when she became Chancellor, and there's a urinal in the Chancellor's personal bathroom in the Treasury. Now, it was used, we are told, by Winston Churchill. It is the oldest toileting facility in the Treasury, and it does, we are told, have some historical importance, and it can't just be removed. So then comes the question, what do you do with it? And there is they could potentially cover it up, but the quote to cover up this urinal is £8,000. That's £8,000 of taxpayers' money in order to cover a urinal. I don't know quite who they're getting some sort of specialist joiner to come up with some sort of covering to go over the
bit of MDF. I mean, surely this is all you need.
I'll tell Rachel I'll do it for 4,000.
Yeah. But it does seem remarkably expensive. But we have our first female chancellor, and I think I'm supportive of Rachel Reeves. I think it does need to be covered up, and then of course if we have a male chancellor again, then they can
just put a plant in front of it or something like that. I think it might be a cheaper option anyway, a more austere option. Thank you. That's Theo Usherwood there, Times Radio's political correspondent.